Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ask JP podcast, where we tackle the exciting questions and issues of the day. I am so excited today to have for y'all House of Representatives member Richard Nelson. For those of you who don't know, he's one of the new class, and we're going to talk about weed today, which I'm sure for many of you, you're probably smoking weed while you're watching this podcast. But that being said, I'm so happy to have you here, Richard. Could you start by giving us kind of a little of your background, kind of where you're from, where you grew up, that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up here in Mandeville, graduated from Mandeville High. I went to LSU, got a degree in biological engineering. Didn't want to grow up yet, went to law school at LSU. So I did my undergrad in 3 years, and then I was like, hey, it's too quick. I gotta stay for another couple of rounds of football. So then I went to law school at LSU, graduated. Didn't really want to be a lawyer, joined the Foreign Service of the State Department, moved to Washington, D.C. right after I graduated, spent a year there, and then went to Germany for 2 years, and then the Republic of Georgia. I was a security engineering officer, which meant I was basically protecting embassies from terrorism and espionage. It was loads of fun, kind of went all over the world in the meantime. I moved to Republic of Georgia, spent 2 years there. My wife and I actually got married while we were in Germany. We actually got married in France, and then we had 2-year honeymoon in Germany. Then we moved to Georgia. We had our first son. He was actually born at Toro in New Orleans while we were living in Georgia, and then she brought him there, and he lived for basically his first 2 years of his life were in the Republic of Georgia. And then from there we moved back to DC. So I spent 2 more years in DC, basically managing a bunch of security projects in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan. And then from there, I was supposed to move to Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya, and ended up instead having the opportunity to move back here and then possibly run for office. So I ended up coming back in 2017, ran for office right after that, won, and, moved back to Mandeville, ran in Mandeville, won. And so got elected in 2019, and it's been fun ever since.
Wow. Very seldom do you see someone go around the world and choose to come back to Louisiana. So that in itself is kind of amazing. And honestly, having been in the legislature as long as I was, I think that your time in Georgia in particular was time well spent in being prepared for what the Louisiana legislature would bring to you. I mean, Afghanistan probably also does help. If you haven't seen, I'm sure you'll learn more and more about Louisiana water systems. There's a lot of similarities between what we have in Afghanistan. The state regularly has to retake them over and make sure people have potable and drinkable water.
Yeah.
I mean, that is an impressive pedigree. So let me ask you a kind of follow-up question. What made you want to be in the Louisiana legislature?
I think I'm from here. Lots of my friends have all moved away. I don't know if any of the kids I went to high school with, very few of them still live in Louisiana. LSU as well. Like a lot of the people I graduated from LSU in undergrad, they all left. And I left, I was gone, and I was still following everything back here. And, generally the news never really improves. It's not like, oh, Louisiana jumped 3 spots and now we're number 49, 47 or something like that. So, just everything kind of continuously goes downhill. And I still have, my friends and my family are here. And I felt like, hey, if I feel like I'm capable of fixing it. If I don't come back and do it, who will? So that was it. I think that there's a lot of significant challenges here, but that's kind of what I've done my whole life is kind of go wherever wherever the biggest problems are. So, I came home because I thought I could fix it.
Well, that is literally the best reason to get into public service. That from my perspective, when I first joined the legislature, it was very similar. Like you see a problem and you're like, you have that ability to kind of lament how bad things are or like step in and try and fix it. And you get to a point where you're like, you just kind of have to jump on the live grenade and say, I'm just going to try and do it. And that leads directly into weed because that's a great lead in. But just like seeing a problem, seeing a insurmountable cause and deciding to tilt full on into it. And let's talk about, we'll try and stay on a thought track to where we're going to go. But why legalization? Like people often bite off more than they can chew when they enter the legislature. Like you literally decide to take a chunk of an elephant's leg as your first real initiative. Like what was the impetus that made you decide you wanted to make this one of your first significant bills?
Yes, I mean, actually, last year or last term, I did a lot of the tort reform stuff, and that was kind of like my very first bill was a tort reform bill that actually got vetoed by the governor. So it was kind of like, I just, there's plenty of people that can bring bills that are, going to be easy or not consequential, but I feel like the fights that are very difficult and complicated, and really you have to work with people. That's where I think that's where I can kind of excel. So, I mean, I think the marijuana thing, I've never used marijuana. I never smoked marijuana. Never probably will, even if we end up legalizing it. It's just, I think it was one of those things where I believe in things like I literally believe in things like individual liberty, free markets, and limited government. And I feel like, especially as a conservative Republican, this is one of those things where I think the Republican Party is really not being consistent with those principles. And I would like to I wanted to change that. And I think the people in general, I mean, Republicans in general, I think support it. I think the people in general support it. I mean, I think all of the polling, and even just anecdotally, everybody kind of supports it. Even my dad, who's, he's like a retired federal agent. Like, you'd never think, he's like, look, we should just legalize this stuff and tax it. Like, it's ridiculous that we still have this. So I think public opinion has definitely left the politicians behind on this. And I think if you look around the country, I mean, even in conservative states, like South Dakota or Montana that have already legalized it, it was done through generally a popular referendum where the people voted on it, even if the politicians were fighting it. And that's the same thing that's kind of going on in Mississippi right now. They had like the very expansive medical marijuana program, and it passed by 75% in the polls. So it's really something, I think, where even if you're in a conservative state, like, the people are just 100% behind it. And so I thought it's a good opportunity to change that conversation and really make a difference. I mean, we go and argue. I mean, we go to Baton Rouge in the Capitol, and we argue about stuff all day long, all the time, that really doesn't impact anybody's lives and that nobody cares about. And so this is an issue that people really care about on across the board. And it really has an impact, really can have an impact in people's lives. I mean, right now in Louisiana, like, if you get caught with marijuana 4 times, like, you go to jail for 8 years. Like, it's a felony, you go to jail for 8 years. That's ridiculous. For having, less than half an ounce of marijuana, you go to jail for 8 years.
But it's funny, Richard. When I came in,
it was like 30 years.
It was 25 years for 3 counts. And to your point, the most conservative member of the legislature, who was like, he literally was like a caricature from like the Andy Griffith Show, Robert Adley, who is like, he's like one of the oldest, most Republicans. We fought to get that changed from 3rd offense 25 years to 4th offense with like expungable weirdos to 8 years. That was like it was like Atlas moving the earth. And it was so weird because there was this fixation. Like, the rest of the country has kind of realized the drug war of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even like the super predator 90s, that was all dumb. Like, the drug war was dumb. It was it failed. But
we lost.
In Louisiana, people are always like, man, what's Louisiana like? Like, what's it like for criminal justice reform? And I'd be like, it's Cool Hand Luke still. Like, it's like, you go mess with some parking meters, you're in jail for the rest of your life. Like, it's still that. And when we'd have these arguments over changing it from 25 to 8, it was like reefer madness would come up. Like, everyone's doing the weeds, then do the cocaine, and then there's something on crack and heroin. And it was like, it was so bizarre because it's almost like there was this reality that some of the law enforcement guys were living in that I knew wasn't reality anymore, but they didn't want to leave it. And it's so interesting to me just kind of how quickly in this last decade or so, which sounds really long, but like in the history of Louisiana, a decade's very small, how much we've been able to move the needle. Because I think we changed that law, Adley and I want to say 6 years ago. In 6 years, to have gone from you can lock someone up for a 3rd joint from 25 years, and that was the law, I think, for 20, 30 years. We went from 25 to 8, and then for you to be poised, with Cedric Glover, of course, doing a separate bill, but like for both of y'all to be poised to go to legalization and decriminalization. And I think you should speak to this as well. People don't understand the amount of money law enforcement wastes and manpower pursuing marijuana cases. Maybe you should speak to that for a second. Like when people look at violent crime in their areas, when you are fixated on picking up people for a joint and you're processing that person for a joint, that's two cops that aren't arresting an armed robber.
Yeah. No, they have. I mean, so I think just in the discussions that I've had with people, there's definitely some districts across the state or some parishes that 30% of their caseload is just marijuana offenses, right? So, I mean, 30% of the infrastructure of their law enforcement and their DAs and their court system is just processing marijuana offenses, which is crazy, right? I think I've had estimates of, it's very difficult to get any real numbers on any of this because it's not tracked centrally. Like nobody knows exactly how many cases there are and how many people are charged and all stuff. It just isn't, there's no one that, puts all that information together. And I've asked for it, obviously. And this is across the criminal justice kind of environment. Anytime you ask for numbers, it's very difficult to get any real number, solid numbers. But just for example, I think the state crime lab says it's about 25% of all the cases, like they do, murders and drug offenses and everything else. About half of their cases are drug offenses. About half of those are just marijuana. And so that's about 4,500 cases a year. And the estimates of what it costs to process every case is about, not just at the crime lab, but for, like you said, the deputies, the DA, the ADAs that have to do it, the court system, it's about $5,000 to $7,000 is about the estimate that I've been given. So just the cases that are processed by the state crime lab, it's like $80,000 a day in marijuana charges and marijuana prosecutions. And so $80,000 a day, and that's just the state crime lab. There's multiple crime labs across the state that run samples everywhere else. So, I mean, you're looking at a huge amount of money that is just, honestly, it's just wasted.
Staggering.
It's just wasted.
And I remember when I was a public defender, oftentimes you would go the prosecution would send the marijuana to get tested. And then if the crime labs, if there was some hiccup in the delivery of the results, you would lose your marijuana case as a prosecutor, but the crime lab would still make its money off the case. So, I mean, like, it's such a bizarre thing that people seem to be fixated on. And to your point, there seems to be like I think you and Cedric, and more so you with this issue right now, have kind of tapped into it. There's almost kind of a inherent hypocrisy in pushing towards like personal liberty and personal choice. I mean, I know that I've had conversations with people who have told me that they don't believe in enforced vaccinations, in the same breath go, I don't think we should tell people they can't smoke weed. Like, if you're for personal liberty, you should be consistent on personal liberty. And exactly. To that point, it's just bizarre. But let me ask you, like, because I've had this experience, that I'm really interested to see how your experience has been. What's it been like trying to work with the sheriffs and DAs on this issue?
The sheriffs are just hunters. I mean, but not every sheriff.
Not every sheriff, right?
Is against it. So, like, the sheriffs individually, there's a bunch of sheriffs that are, this is a waste of my time. It's a waste of all of our time. I think there's a lot of law enforcement, like, the rank and file law enforcement. I mean, almost everyone I've talked to is like, this is a waste of time for us to, arrest potheads or cite potheads and have to go testify or do anything, have any involvement at all. The Sheriff's Association, of course, has, they're the ones that you fight on all these issues, and they've been fighting against marijuana legalization or decriminalization or anything forever. And it's really not based on any kind of facts. It's not based. It's very difficult. You can't really have a debate with them because their fundamental premise is just marijuana is bad, and that. They literally told me the other day after I got the bill out of the committee, they're like, listen, you're wrong that we can't win the war on drugs. Like, if we had $400 million, we could shut down the cartels and the dealers and we'd win. And I tell them, I was like, look, America's fought this war on drugs forever. Like for 50 years, we've spent trillions of dollars on it. And we haven't done anything. So, you think $400 million is going to make any difference in Louisiana? You're just like, you're living in a fairy tale, honestly.
Well, you deal with the state budget, Richard. If we had $400 million to sitting around in the state, my first thought would not be, let's dump that into the war on drugs. It'd be like, let's go ahead and do early childhood education, or let's revisit our tax structure.
Buy everybody in Louisiana lunch for like a week or something, right? Yeah. Like, there's so many other things that you could do that would just be better than just setting it in a barrel and lighting it on fire.
Yeah, it would be the equivalent of, like, let's just take stacks of $100 bills. We could keep one sheriff's department warm with the multiple barrels of money being tossed into it. I mean, it's just that whole statement is just kind of like, I mean, 400,
Yeah, I mean,
like 400 million dollars. And honestly, the sad part is that you're
it's
right.
not.
That's a drop in the bucket from what we've spent as a state and a country for the last 50 years fighting
Yeah,
marijuana.
exactly. And I mean, and even if you spent $400 million, you still wouldn't win. Like, you might drive the price of marijuana up a little bit, but that's it, right? Like, I mean, it's just a joke. I mean, I don't know. So, I mean, to some extent, I think the sheriffs are just disconnected. But I think they're coming. Honestly, I think this year I mean, this year they said in the committee, look, this is inevitable. This is coming, and we just have to figure out what we're going to do. So, I mean, I think that's the first time they've ever said that ever.
It is the first time.
They've never admitted that.
You got them to admit that, because when I was dealing with them years ago, their position was, this is a fad. Legalization's a fad. If we hold the line, the fad will pass over, and then we won't have to worry about the fad anymore. So, like, their position literally was, just hold the line, it'll go away. And not only is it not going away, it's gotten exponentially bigger. And what's amazing, and I'm talking about this pure, like, let's talk pure economics. It's like sports betting, in that we say sports betting is illegal in Louisiana, so people sport bet elsewhere. If people think that people are not going to states where marijuana is legal, buying it and coming back to Louisiana to smoke it, I have some land I could sell them in Nigeria. Like, it's happening.
Yeah, no.
So,
Yeah,
I mean, all we're doing is just giving away money. And on top of that, like you said, I mean, one thing we have learned about the war on drugs is that the better we got at it, the more money drug cartels made off the product.
Yeah,
so all we've done is drive demand.
Price.
That's right.
You drive up the price, more people jump in, and then the price goes back down. I mean, it's economics works whether it's a black market or not. It's just whether or not you send the money. The only question is whether you send the money to drug dealers and drug cartels, or you're doing it to legitimate businesses that you can tax and pay for roads, schools, and police and all that good stuff. So I think they're coming around. I mean, I imagine the next couple of years they'll be on board, but this year was kind of obviously this was more of an Omaha Beach kind of situation for them, as opposed to a slow negotiate. They had no interest. They had no interest in negotiating this year, so they didn't think that there was going to be any kind of momentum behind it. So I think we proved that wrong.
Well, and I mean, I'll tell you, it's always been interesting to me, because the acceleration with what you've done versus what we've done in the past. I mean, you have tremendous bipartisan support to push this agenda, to push this idea. And I think what's been different is that back when I was doing it several years ago, when Robert Adley and I, which was bipartisan in itself, to a Republican and a Democrat doing it, but there was this line that, for the most part, really rural Republicans would not cross, where they were saying, my sheriff says this is a bad thing. It doesn't affect me. I don't know anything about it, but they're saying that if we do this, it'll be bad. And I think what's happened is, as more states have passed marijuana legalization, as all the horror stories of, like, the marijuana apocalypse with, like, potheads raiding stores, stealing jewelry to go buy some more weed, as all that has not materialized, and especially with term limits kicking in, where, and I'm going to say this and, like, get obliterated by some of my colleagues who are still up there, but, like, the average age of a legislator in the House right now has dropped by about 10 years. There are more people in our collective age group than they've ever been before. And for people who are sub 55, 60, they're just not scared of weed. They're not. Yeah. I mean,
it's funny, because the irony is that, like, most of the younger people in the House right now aren't going to support my bill. Like, they don't support it. And you're like, I mean, come on, guys. Like, you're really like, oh, well, I don't know. There's still a lot of, like, you're talking about, that people that said, hey, my sheriff called me and told me it's bad. There's still a lot of that. But I mean, honestly, a lot of the people would have never before this year ever considered that Louisiana could possibly legalize marijuana. Like, it's just a brand new idea. It's like aliens landed and told them that, So it's something that you got to educate people to begin with and show them that it's possible. I mean, like, that's one of those things, is that I think everyone, before I quietly shopped this around, people were like, we'll probably legalize it eventually in, like, 5 or 6 years, I can see it. And so I think it's going to happen much sooner than that now. I mean, it might not happen this year. I mean, I think it's still kind of a long shot to get it done this year, but at the end of the day, I think it's definitely if nobody ever brought the bill, like if nobody ever made a serious push for it, it would have been 5 years after that ever happened, if nothing else, you know. So I think now most of the people can wrap their minds around it. And honestly, most of if you had a blind vote in the House of Representatives, if you just had a blind vote, you get 90 votes in favor, right? 90 votes in favor. There's about 15 people that think marijuana is going to kill everybody and they wouldn't vote for it. But almost everybody else says it's fine. I don't have any issue with it, but I think I don't want to bear the political consequences of making this vote now. And I mean, that's really where we are. So next year it'll be significantly less, or people will be willing to get on board. And then the year after that, and I mean, that's the reality. I mean, like, that's why even the sheriffs and the DA say, hey, look, this is inevitable. People are going to do this, especially as Mississippi or Arkansas or any of those other guys kind of have more liberal policies. It's going to happen. So, I mean, like, that's my point is, hey, look, why don't we just get on board now and, make $100 million a year in tax money and, instead of kicking the can down the road at a price of $100 million a year, like, how much good can we do with $100 million a year that doesn't have to go to the drug cartels and the drug dealers?
Well, I mean, it's also like partially context, because like right now, we're fighting to become the first state to legalize paying athletes for name and likeness so that we can steal all the best athletes in the country. Because basically, we're rushing because we're like, we want to be the first in this.
It's a first mover advantage, right?
Right. So, and it's like we lost the opportunity, obviously, whatever it was, to be the first mover on marijuana. But I think, like, let's be honest, part of the specter of your bill is part of the impetus that's moving Representative Glover's bill, because they're like, we're not for legalization, but
it basically, Glover's bill, it basically passed without any opposition. Like, nobody said anything against it. I mean, in committee, nobody said it. I don't think the sheriffs didn't even put in a card against it. Like, nobody put in a card against it. Like a bill that was decriminalizing marijuana got out without opposition, basically. I mean, and part of it is obviously because, there's a giant dumpster fire with that bill that everybody's running toward. And so, sometimes my role in the legislature is do nothing but to be a glorious distraction for somebody else to run into the end zone, which I'm fine with. I mean, everybody has to have their role, right? But
it's like I said, it's super interesting because I'm going to make a prediction, and I never make predictions, generally speaking. I'm going to make a prediction. I tell people all the time, whenever you look at major issues like marijuana, when you look at the people behind it, like, whenever you're doing like CJR stuff, it's like the specter of George Soros is like hovering over your shoulder, and all the DAs and sheriffs are like, don't do it. George Soros and his cabal wants to get you. You don't hear that on issues like yours because Republican libertarians are behind you. That's the specter behind you on this issue. Like the Koch brothers are like, this is stupid and a waste of money. And it's like, I know especially those young guys, a lot of them are young, they're new, and their sheriff's the big deal. And sheriffs are a huge deal in the state, especially the more rural the area, the more powerful the sheriff and DA. But it's like, they don't even have the money to poll their own districts to see where people are at. I would bet that as long as the organizations that support this issue continue to poll it and follow it and supply that polling data to those people, there will be a moment where they're going to come to the realization this is a significant enough issue that it creates a vulnerability. In that if people,
Just so you know, so we polled, Blake Miguez, the Republican leader in the House. We polled his district at 70% in favor of marijuana legalization. So I told him, I was like, why are you going to take a stance against your people, Blake?
And I'm sure that went over like a lead balloon. He's just like, whatever.
Yeah, it's like, he'll ignore law enforcement when they tell him not to have, when they try to take his guns or something like that. They say, they don't want constitutional carry. And so, but on marijuana.
Marijuana is reefer madness.
The people are 100%. The people are 70% in favor. Then he's got to listen to the law enforcement. So
that's okay. So this is kind of like an ambush podcast. I literally ambushed Richard. Like, I want to get this done before the Tuesday vote, because the vote for this issue will be up Tuesday, and I'm going to really burn the midnight oil to get this out this weekend so people can see it. But what do you need from people for Tuesday? I mean, obviously it's a long shot. That part of people are saying, well, listen, I voted for Cedric's bill. I voted for the weed one time. I'm not voting for the weed twice. But what do you think the public can do just to press the issue? Because as you know, I mean, on an issue like this, Danny Martini, who was before your time, but Danny had this really, really good line, which I'm going to give to you because he gave it to me. He said, "Bad bills pass the first time, good bills take a couple of times." And your bill is in, I mean, like you said, constitutional carry, where people who've never been to a gun range, you walk around with, like guns sticking out of their like elastic track pants. Okay, legalizing something that everyone wants legalized, it's going to take a while, but what do you think people can do before Tuesday to help give you the best chance to make the best showing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people have done. I mean, they've called all their representatives. They've called their. I mean, eventually maybe they'll have to call their senators. But honestly, that's about all you can do. I think that at the end of the day, the sheriffs have been basically going to war over this, like trying to tell. They've called and threatened. Every representative has been called and threatened by their sheriff that the world's going to end if they vote to legalize marijuana. So there's, at this point, I mean, I keep calling them. I mean, there's no reason not to. I think that that's the best thing to do. Because I think, like I said, most of the politicians or most of the reps are not ideologically opposed to the legalization of marijuana. What they are is they're just kind of politically hesitant because they feel like, oh, well, I don't know if I don't know what consequences I'm going to take in my district if I do this. And I mean, I obviously don't care about political consequences. That's why I bring bills like this. But I understand that, I understand the politicians, they have that, they have that hesitancy. It's a whole lot easier to, just name bridges in schools and not do controversial things, vote no on safe instances. The problem is that in Louisiana, we're number 50. And if we don't change things and do things that make us uncomfortable, we're going to be number 50 for forever. So I think people just need to have, pressure their politicians into doing what they want. And, if you stay quiet, then your view's not going to matter. So, I mean, that's the only thing that I think in front of Tuesday. I mean, I would continue to call them and email them or whatever. I would say the form emails, I mean, like I know people do a lot of those form emails, like
they're bad.
Basically get ignored. We basically just ignored. Like nobody cares. I mean, if you click a button and say, I really care about X, Y, and Z, if it's a form email, like everybody gets blasted by those all day long and we just ignore them. So I think, but an actual call or an actual email that says, hey, look, this is me and this is, I live on this street and I really care about this issue. It kind of connects it because you're from my district and I know, one, you're from my district, and two, that you took the time to actually write something. So that's really the best thing you can do. Okay.
And I'm assuming you have social media, right? Of some sort.
I do have social media. I mean, you can find me on Facebook. I respond to stuff. I'm on Twitter and I think I'm on Instagram. I haven't looked on Instagram in like 10 years though. So don't send me a message on Instagram. I run into people every now and then that are like, I sent you a message on Instagram and you never did anything. I was like, look, like my wife's on Instagram.
I'm gonna tell you a secret to save you the pain that I'm currently in. Go invest in Instagram. Because I'm telling you this because my Twitter game is tight. My Facebook game is okay. My Instagram game was trash. And what has happened is, as more of our parents have kind of taken over Facebook, everyone is going to Instagram. So it's like, don't make the mistake I made. Like, leave politics and try and go back in and like try and engage and be like, oh crap, where are all the people my age? They're on Instagram. They don't know you exist. So like,
no.
Do it now. I mean,
I have it.
But you have to go.
So I don't have any social media on my phone at all. So like usually like my wife or my assistant and stuff will manage it just because.
Richard, this is turning into an intervention. You need to give your social media accounts to somebody, even your assistant, just to post something.
She has it. She posts it. I post stuff every now and then.
Go. Instagram needs to be fed every day. Trust me, don't neglect it, because when it's a half-dead carcass and you have to resuscitate it, it's a pain in the butt. So my free advice, from one trying to be a politician again to one up-and-comer who's got a lot of eyeballs on him, go feed Instagram a little bit.
Go do Instagram. All you got to do is post one weed article on Instagram, or post one weed picture on.
Post a weed picture. Post some kid pictures of like, look, here's my kid. He's cute. 7 billion likes. Just feed it a little bit. You don't have to like. And honestly, like when I was in the legislature, Twitter was fine, but like social media becomes such a distraction because people want to interact through it, and you want to interact and be accessible, but it's overwhelming when you're trying to do be a legislator.
80,000 people. Yeah, no. That's the deal. So I did it, especially like last year. I did a whole bunch on social media, and I was like, this is just consuming. I'm going to step back. I deleted it all off my phone. I was like, I'm going to be a good millennial and just get rid of social media. Essentially, my wife still does it. I post stuff every now and then, but I'm not like Tanner. Tanner McGee will just sit there and he does Twitter battles all day long. And I was like,
and honestly, like Tanner. I love Tanner, but I tell Tanner all the time, like Cedric Richmond gave me this quote. Another one I'm going to give you. I'm just giving you all the quotes that I live by. And when I was a rep, a baby rep, when I was just got there in 2006, I got in an argument with some nut job of guy from Shreveport, and we were arguing at the well in the house for like 30 minutes. And I came back and I sat down. I was like, yeah, I schooled that asshole. And Cedric came over, leans over and goes, I'm going to tell you a secret, JP. When you're arguing with a crazy person from a distance, no one can tell which one of you is crazy. That is literally what I've been trying to tell Tanner for time immemorial. It's one thing to engage with someone on Twitter or social media, especially when they have a concern you can kind of address quickly. You cannot argue on social media because one, you're limited by how many characters you can put on Twitter, but two, it's like when you argue with people on social media, even if you win, the argument will reignite 3 days later after they've researched it on Google to start over again. Like, you just can't do that. So, I mean, I don't want us to evolve into the merits or not merits of social engagement in politics, but that's kind of where we veer. But anyway,
I don't ever argue with people. I don't argue with anyone on social media.
You should never.
I don't argue with anybody. I was like,
if someone makes a really good point and it seems like it'd be worth a conversation, I will always get their email and meet them in person and talk to them. Because sometimes somebody will hit something and you're like, wow, that's really insightful. I'd love to talk to you about it further, but let's go meet in person. That's very rare, but I do it. But it's just, anyway, I wish you tremendous luck. I hope, like you said, I'm glad that you realized that this is a building block towards a future, because obviously I thought that I watched Cedric's bill and I was like, this is so obvious that people who are literally trying to murder your bill to death, they gave a vote to Cedric to show their voters that I'm not against the weed. Yeah. But they gave him that vote because they want to be able to say they voted for a bill. But it'll be interesting to see how with Cedric's bill in the Senate. Cedric's a pretty formidable guy. He's been around the block. He served with my dad, so he's been around the block, left, then came back to the block, so he knows a lot of stuff. So, I mean, but it'll be interesting. But I'm so glad you're pushing this issue. I'm so glad you're pushing the envelope, because the envelope never really moves unless somebody is really pushing to break that damn thing. So, I mean, you're so impressive. Your background, oh my God, I had no idea. I mean, we know some mutual people, and they said you were a sharp guy, but I always am kind of in awe of people. I didn't do I left, obviously, like many people did, to go to college and go to do stuff, but like to have traveled the world and chosen to come back here, we are very lucky as a state to have you. Is your wife from here?
She's from Shreveport.
Thank God. Because if your wife wasn't from Louisiana, you never would have came back. All right, Richard. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I guess I'm going to burn some oil to get this done so it goes out soon, but I really am very impressed with what you've done and what you're going to do in the future. And I think with people like you, bipartisanship is not quite dead. It might be on life support, but at least you're giving the chest compressions and CPR. So, I mean, it's still there. So, I mean, keep doing what you're doing. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Just thank you so much and have a great day.
Yeah, thanks for having me.